This is Terry Beatley, your host of What If We've Been Wrong? I'm shining light into some dark places so that beauty, goodness, and truth defeat the schemes of the enemy. It's true, people are perishing for lack of knowledge, and we're instructed to have nothing to do with the evil deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. That's what I do on What If We've Been Wrong? Rethink, explore, and uncover some hidden truths so that more people can experience an abundant life and the joy of being set free from the shackles that hold us in prison. Welcome to What If We've Been Wrong? Today I'm shining light into the darkness of radical feminism and its impact on masculinity. You know, it's true. American men have been wounded. And we just have to pause and think for a moment, what's been the impact on American men after decades now, in which sex has been eroded to a recreational sport, a culture where personal responsibility has been sacrificed by abortion on demand, a culture in which pornography addictions are just strangling American men, and a culture where women have become mere sex objects in men's eyes. How has this impacted American men, and where do we go from here? Well, my guest today is Jimmy Berkon. He has a master's degree in theology, and he's done speaking in a number of places on theology of the body, and he's a regular contributor to Fiat Radio Network and Catholic365.com. Jimmy, welcome onto What If We've Been Wrong?
Thank you, Terry. It's an honor to be here, and you're doing great work. Please, by all means, keep it up. The world needs to hear what you have to say. That's for sure.
And that's what I've been telling you, Jimmy, ever since I met you.
Yeah.
I've been telling you, it's like, all right, you've got a great story to tell, an insight that every man across America needs to hear. And what I find so real about you is that, well, first off, you're just real. You are like organic, and it's like from the first time I met you, we always had like those organic conversations, and nothing was really off limits. And so to my to our friends who are listening today, Jimmy, he's got this knack of having in-depth conversations with people. It could be at the bar, at the gym, it could be going into the jail. Jimmy Berkon is the real Jimmy Berkon, and with that master's degree in theology and his insight into Pope John Paul's theology of the body, I just thought you would make a great person to interview to explore how has this wounded men. And so why don't we kick it off first, though, just about like original identity. What do we mean by like feminism in its original form is a good thing, that original identity? Can you expound on that?
Sure. Well, I mean, my work has kind of been limited, really reading about the original feminists like Susan B. Anthony, but I can tell you I have researched a little bit about Margaret Sanger. But with the original identity, I mean, first of all, I think people need to realize that feminism in its original form was a good thing. But I have nothing against the women's suffrage movement, giving them the right to vote. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's actually a good thing. And the women who fought for that should not be condemned. They should be commended. And they should be the ones, their names should be held up with what feminism truly is. The fact that women can have a career, I think that's a great thing. I mean, women need to be able to also choose their own destiny. There's nothing wrong with that. We're talking about John Paul's theology of the body. One thing he talks about is self-determination. In other words, you determine your destiny. You've been put on this earth to determine who you are. Now you always have to do that in the light of truth. So there's nothing wrong with that. Women possess the equal dignity of men. And I remember my favorite author, John Eldredge, and his wife, Stacy. He's the author of Wild at Heart. She wrote Captivating, two outstanding books, probably the best on masculinity and femininity. And I love what both of them say, that woman, she was the crown of creation. To those who have a Christian background or even who don't have a Christian background, when God created the heavens and the earth, he ended with woman. The common misperception is, ending, really not that big of a deal. But if you think about it, the movie, every good movie ends with a bang. Every good, I like how Stacey Eldredge and John Eldredge say it, every good opera ends with a crescendo. It just builds, and then boom, you just hit the highlight. Well, woman was the highlight. Nothing was, I love how they say it, nothing was set until there was Eve, until there was woman.
See, it's so beautiful the way you write that. I mean, not the way you write, the way you say that. And I think the radical feminism, I mean, these are angry, wounded women, and they set out with that goal back in the 60s to take down patriarchy, to destroy the American family, which we've already covered. But, you know, every time I've spoken to you, Jimmy, somehow what usually comes up in conversation is that movie called Lone Survivor, which millions of people saw. How do you weave this into this topic of feminism and, original identity?
Sure. Well, I mean, Lone Survivor really is, well, first of all, when I went in to see that movie, and Terry, I said it at the talk you let me give at your conference, you know, I went into that movie subconsciously thinking, I wish there was a movie out there that talked about modern day masculinity. And 2 hours later, I had my answer. Lone Survivor is a story of about a 4-man SEAL team sent into Afghanistan to get a high valued Taliban target. They're discovered by 3 shepherds. And after they let the shepherds go, if they kill the shepherds, you know, it'll be found out and they'll be put in prison. So they let the shepherds go. Their positions betrayed, and all 3 of the men, save Luttrell, were killed. Now Luttrell, he's a Navy SEAL, and those guys. I actually went to school with a guy who's now a Navy SEAL. Those guys are the toughest of the tough. And Luttrell, he had what was called 11 wounds in his lower body, basically shrapnel sticking out of his legs. He bit his tongue in half, swallowed it. He blew out his shoulder apart, and he actually gives talks. And he was on the way to being a homeless veteran. Rick Perry of Texas took him in, and through Rick Perry, he met his now wife, Melanie. And in his talks, what he actually said of the women, I found this very telling. He said, women are the toughest species on the planet. And if I could just add this in real quick, Terry, seeing my mother, how she is with myself and my siblings, my sister with my 2 little nieces, and I worked with a couple single mothers at my bar when I was at the Western Arlington Gateway, trying to raise kids, trying to put them through school, and just trying to pay the bills. I mean, it gave me a new view, really, of what, you know, how tough women are. And I mean, I agree with him. I mean, women really are the toughest species. Y'all really are the toughest species on the planet. I mean, really, you know, I mean, we end up skinning our knees as men. What do? We cry for mommy, you know. I mean, and women are able to go through childbirth. I mean, maybe I'm overstepping my bounds saying this, but I recently had a kidney stone, and they equate that to childbirth.
Right.
The fact that it's wow. What more can you say than wow? So.
Well, all right. So moving forward, okay, we've talked about this before. Feminism was hijacked, and of course we know it was hijacked by one of the biggest groups out there was National Organization of Women. I've covered that in a different interview with Mallory Millett, who was the sister to the communist Kate Millett, who was one of the co-founders of the National Organization of Women. But walk us through some of the effects of radical feminism and how they've so tried to destroy manhood, and how has this affected men? And again, I know you talk to men all over, whether it be the bar, the jail, or the gym. You're out there talking to people, Jimmy. So give us some insight there.
Sure. Well, I mean, you just mentioned the jail, and one thing I'll bring up there is when I spoke to a prison psychologist, you know, we were talking about the guy I was talking to who got released on parole. Thank God. I hope he's making amends with his life. But something he told me was very revealing. He said the majority of men are in here who are in the prison system, in the jail they had either suffered some form of abuse or they had a past abortion. I found that was very, very telling. I mean, it was like when he said that, I had heard before that a lot of men who were in prison were previously involved in an abortion. When he said that, I was like, it's true, really, you know. And you were just, I mean, what feminism promised. I was reading an article about a girl. She, I think she's from Canada. I forget her name, but she was bringing out the good points of feminism, and most of them ended up with, "Oh, guys, you can have free sex. You can have free sex. You can have free sex." What it's done, abortion, pornography, the hookup culture, and then breaking up. What it's done, I mean, you are basically looking at every guy you look at, you're looking at a wounded corpse inside. I mean, a guy on the outside might have everything together, but with the majority of us, get to the inside, it's a different story, you know. And go on ahead.
Well, walk me through what it's like. Let's say even in your days when you were bartending, and the guys are sitting around the bar, and maybe it's late at night, and they're loosened up a little bit because they've had a couple drinks, and you shared with me how they have opened up. And I mean, some are men of faith, or maybe weak faith. Maybe their roots are really shallow. And then, obviously others are men who don't know who Jesus Christ is. Can you share some of those open secrets that they shared with you as they shared their woundedness because of what's happened to them? Actually, let me just preface this with, America did not always look like this, Jimmy, and I know you know it. There was a time when sex was sacred, and it was preserved for the most part for holy matrimony, and it was something so special. It wasn't just a recreational sport. It wasn't, and so women were there holding up that bar, and the beautiful thing is, vast majority of men would rise to the occasion, and they would meet the women where the women were at, and women were not like, "Hey, take me." And so now everything has changed from the free sex to the skimpy clothing to, it's like the women are walking around demanding equality and demanding to be treated with dignity, but then at the same token, they're wearing their skirts with their butt cheeks hanging out and their breasts hanging out the top of their their skimpy little tight tops. How so we know how we got here. Share with our friends today who are listening, when these men open up and they share their woundedness, what are they telling you?
Sure. Well, I mean, you're actually kind of making me think about a guy I worked with when I worked at a gym, and he came from a divorced household. He was forced to go to church. His father did not go to church. He just dropped him off and kind of like, oh, just tell Jesus I said hello. And when I would talk to him, he would be bedding women left and right, and he would brag about his conquest. But when you really look at it, when I really spoke to him, you could see a guy who was living in fear. Like, he would constantly have to, like King Kong would beat his chest. Yeah. He would have to beat his chest to convince himself, oh, I'm a man, I'm a guy, I can get any girl I want. Oh yeah, and I'm not saying any of this to condemn guys who are like that. Look, I there was a time that I used to beat my chest too, trying to make myself sound bigger than I really was. Right. But he was, inside was almost like a little boy crying for attention, crying for affirmation, crying, to be loved, to be shown that yes, you are a man, to get that validation.
And does so much of it surround around validation to know?
Oh my word! Oh yeah! Oh my word! Yes, absolutely. If a guy, and again, this is something John Eldridge brings up, and and John Paul would bring up too. If a guy does not know that he's a man, if he does not know he's a man, he's going to go to any length he can to prove it. Any length he can. You know what I mean? You look at guys that, and here's the thing that people don't understand about, and I know guys, I've had my struggles too, namely with pornography, but I can tell you too, everyone honored Hugh Hefner as just a pioneer of women's rights, of men's liberation from the puritanical constraints brought on by, even when the Mayflower came over to America. Some of what Hefner, I mean, I'm not going to argue with wanting to get rid of the Puritanism, because yes, I mean, it's a swinging of the pendulum to the extreme right. Problem is, he swung the pendulum to the extreme left. But I can tell you from experience, also from knowing guys who struggle with this stuff, he was probably the loneliest man in the world. The loneliest man.
All right, let's say it one more time. Call it out. Put that all in one sentence. Who are we talking about? Hugh Hefner, right?
Hugh Hefner. He was probably the loneliest man in the world. And
I want to drive that point home. Sum it up again. Why make your argument again? Because now this is subjective. This is from me, but just kind of knowing that struggle and everything, knowing guys who've had that struggle, I believe he was the loneliest man in the world, because what the hookup culture's given us, and this guy I was telling you about at the gym who beat his chest about betting all these women, in the end, it doesn't give you the satisfaction you want. It's isolation, and the feminists thought that they were freeing men, that it was that it would give us the freedom, give women the freedom to sleep around, be happy, joy, that kind of thing. Right. What it is, it's isolation. It's you're trading in unity with another person for mere moments of pleasure. You know what I mean? Right. I've talked to so many, so many guys, and
it's kind of funny being a bartender, but also too when I was going through school, people would give me their confessions, and guys on the outside, they beat their chests about getting with a girl, or the kind of stuff they were doing, hooking up, breaking up, that kind of thing. Oh, I got her, blah blah blah.
Right.
But on the inside, really, what it is, it's a little boy really crying for help, crying for attention, crying for that affirmation. And those guys, I mean, when you really get down to it, and I've lived this too. The insecurity you have is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Like, let me give you an example where we're talking about addiction. Now, this doesn't have to do with, I don't know this guy's backstory, but, a lot of times the hookup culture will lead into alcoholism. I had one guy at my bar. He was in the midst of, his wife left him, took the kids. And I'm guessing because he had a problem with alcoholism. Well, he was at my bar and he was pounding Bud Lights, and it's kind of like, I was able to, again, not trying to condemn or anything, but I was able to talk to him. I gave him references to some divorce ministries, divorce prevention ministries, be like, hey, you should talk to these guys. But, here he was drinking, trying to drown his sorrows away. Like here's a guy, he's almost like he's in bondage, crying for help, trying to get that help. He even was on the phone with his sponsor. And I overheard his sponsor, I think, say to him, dude, you're at a bar. I mean, you shouldn't be drinking, because I got the idea that his sponsor over the phone, I wasn't eavesdropping, but I could hear somewhat. I got the idea his sponsor was basically telling him, dude, this is how you got into this situation in the first place.
And
because
drowning it out. Yeah.
He's drowning it out. But I mean, guys, with the hookup culture, I mean, hookup culture has allowed men to drown out our sorrows. Our question of, am I a man? Do I have what it takes? As John Eldridge likes to say in Wild at Heart, we've been able to really drown our sorrows, but also take our question to the woman. And having said that, when you're sleeping around, when you're breaking up, I mean, really, when you're giving so much of yourself, it's almost like I'm not one of those guys to watch the zombie apocalypse movies,
right.
But I did see. I'm going to finish with this. I did see something on Facebook where a woman was talking about soul ties. And every time you sleep with someone, it's not just a physical act, it's a spiritual act.
Exactly.
Because that's how human sex, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, because that's why the marriage bond is so strong. But what this article was it showed a guy sleeping with a girl, and she basically, her whole complexion was ashen, like she was a zombie. And what it really portrays is that with that hookup culture, instead of filling you up, kind of filling the gas tank, it drains you. It drains the very person who you are. It drains the very substance of who you are as a man.
And that's
from
a
you.
Perfect way for us to wrap up segment one. My guests, hang in there. We're going to come right back with Jimmy Berkon. Thank you so much.
Think back to the last time you felt healthy and energized. The best times of our lives occur when we're at the peak of our health, sleeping better, full of energy and focus. We know that fades with age, and you might be feeling the effects of aging as low energy and poor sleep. But it doesn't have to be that way. There haven't been any nutrition systems designed to rejuvenate our bodies as we get older until now. Healthy Cell Pro is the only multi-nutrient system that impacts the building block of your body, the cell. Created by anti-aging expert and Nobel Prize nominee, Dr. Vincent Giampapa, award-winning Healthy Cell Pro cuts through the complexity of nutrition supplements by simply giving you the purest ingredients, filling dietary gaps to nourish your cells and enhance your quality of life for optimal performance. Visit healthycell.com and use code OUTLOUD for an exclusive discount, or call 844-869-9958.
All right, you're back with Terry Beatley and Jimmy Berkon. We're talking about how radical feminism, how it has harmed and wounded masculinity. And so in that first segment, we were just kind of touching on this hookup culture and what's left behind. And Jimmy, you were talking about soul ties, because we know sex was supposed to be for holy matrimony, for marriage, and to it's that bond between a husband and a wife. But in this hookup culture, if people just have sex and they go on their merry ways, is there more to it than meets the eye?
Absolutely there is. Absolutely. And the article, we finished off talking about that article. I wish I could find it for the life of me. I need to look it back up again. But when I was telling you about it, was showing a guy in bed with a woman, and she was ashen. She almost looked like a zombie, like a ghost. And the point of the article was, when a woman sleeps with a man, his DNA is implanted in her brain. And it's something that will never, it's implanted into her brain forever. You know,
wow.
And when, in some our culture does not talk about, even with, you talk about how much radical feminism has hijacked, in the public schools, or even talking about, even when I had sex ed and such like that, we didn't talk about this stuff. Right. Soul ties, giving up the heart and such like that. There's far more to it, just the hookup culture. It's not just your body.
Right.
It's really your person.
Well, absolutely, it's a person, it's a soul, but what our young people have been taught in the government-run school ever since Planned Parenthood, and then Alfred Kinsey's group called SEICUS, SEICUS. Once they got sex education into the school, they've reduced the sex act to more like an animal instinct. The emotional part, the psychological part, the human part, they've just reduced it down to an act. And then when you compound it with all the other things that the radical communists of the National Organization of Women, we're doing, it's like now what we end up with is a cult everything is upside down, and we've got a culture of wounded men and wounded women. I like the way you described that ashen woman. How many women out there who are sleeping around? How many of you know that the DNA of that guy you're sleeping with is going to end up in your brain? Jimmy, if America really knew that, there'd be a far less hookup culture.
No, I think there would be. And when I was part of a group that was studying some writings of John Paul II, and one girl, she brought up her argument. She thought birth control, population control was a good thing. The fact that women can sleep around. And one thing I wanted to ask her was, well, if you think that's so good to sleep around, be with these guys, what are you going to say to your spouse on your wedding day? And I know that's something that it's kind of like it's like a dagger in the heart from hearing me say that. Now, we're going to talk about this at the end, but there is a way to find redemption, find healing, find wholeness. But the fact is, when you're wounded, there will be, when you're wounded by something, going back to that lone survivor example, Marcus Luttrell carries the scars of his wounds. He'll have those for the rest of his life. Right. Same thing with the hookup culture. We will always have these wounds. There are certain wounds I have that are still with me. Now, of course, all glory to God, you can heal from it, but it's something that cannot be denied.
Well, let's go ahead and start talking about where do people go to find the healing? And so let me kind of set this up, because I'm kind of picturing you in, and again, I know you're not bartending right now, but in the days that you were, it's like, well, you're meeting men who are believers, whether they be strong or weak, believers as in Jesus Christ, and then others who are not non-believers. They don't know anything about Jesus. But Jimmy, you're a man of deep, deep faith. Your faith is so strong, and you've had to rely on it. You know what it means, to climb up on that cross and to suffer with Jesus Christ. And so, it's a lifelong process. It's not just you; it's me, and it's anybody who's been awakened to that. If we see Christ as our Savior. So, but walk us through this. Okay, you're behind the bar. It's 12:30 a.m. and you've got four guys in front of you. Two, claim to be believers. They used to go to church or whatever, but then you got to what would you be telling these men? Let's first start with the people who have no faith, but yet they're so wounded by this culture of, what would you be telling them if they're looking for you for answers? What do I do now? I've made a mess out of my life,
Sure. Well, one thing I want to say, one thing that bartending really taught me was, I got my master's from Franciscan University with the greatest theologians out there. Scott Hahn, Dr. Mike Miravalli. My favorite was Dr. Militic, because he taught me how to think and think through arguments. But one thing I've really learned at the bar was how many good guys there are out there. I mean, granted, yes, we're making our mistakes as guys. Yeah, we're knuckleheads. A lot of times we realize that, but there are a lot of good guys out there. I mean, I work with guys who made mistakes in their past. They were married. They were trying to provide a good living for their families. You know, they were trying to help their kids, put their kids through school. One guy, really great guy, really didn't go to church, but we were able to have great conversations together. Right. You know, he's a great bartender. You know, he was kind of like our big brother too, to all of us. But, you know, he had a kid expecting another, which was great. And when we had a meeting, he announced it. You know, it was affirmation of life. That's a great thing to see, especially in that environment. Excuse me. But you know, one thing where I really what I've really found works behind the bar is you bring up the gift of self, right? And that's something that really hits people, because it's something that, you know, you talk about how sex ed and radical feminism has hijacked the dignity of the human person. The gift of self is something we don't hear about, honestly, at all. I never knew it existed until I went to Franciscan. I started reading John Paul II. You know, and even then, it took me about 10 years to wrap my head around it. It's so deep, it's so dense, but it's so beautiful, you know?
You said it actually.
Go on ahead.
You said it sort of fast. I just want to make sure everybody can hear. It's called the gift of self. The gift of self. So tell us more about it.
Sure. I get kind of excited when I talk about it because it is so beautiful. But yeah, the gift of self, what I would tell guys is when, you know, first of all, when I mentioned I studied theology, I probably got one person who basically told me to, you know, bleep off. And that was it. After serving probably at least 2,000 people at that restaurant, if not more, probably more, you know, people are open to it. You know, they're fascinated by it. And what I would, you know, I'd lean across the bar. Let's say if I was talking to a guy named Bobby, and I don't think I ever had a guy named Bobby at my bar, so let's just use that name. You know, he like, you know, he'd ask about theology. He's like, oh, what do you want to do with that? Well, I'd like to teach people about the gift of self. He's like, oh, what's that? And I would tell him, I'd look him straight in the eye and say, well, Bobby, what it means is you, Bobby, you're original. You're unique. You have what's called a uniqueness of self. You're incommunicable. That's a big word. What that means is no one like you existed before you were born. No one like you will exist after you're gone. This is your one and only. And I mean, really, we live in a world of Facebook where everyone wants to be relevant. Everyone wants to be famous. I mean, you talk about an imitation of greatness. You know, and this isn't one of those like, you know, like one of those like, oh, Ned Flanders kind of thing. Oh, hey, Jeff, you know, you're you know, you know how Ned Flanders talks. Like, you know, it's not like one of those Ned Flanders kind of things. Like, oh, you're meant for greatness. That kind. No. What it means really is, that was a pretty lousy impression too, but whatever. But what it means is, you know, this life, you know, this is your one and only, and you're meant to make yourself a gift, to be a gift for other people. You know, to love them, to serve them, to listen to them, also to be served by them too, you know, to receive from them as well, to give of yourself and to also receive who they are.
You know what?
You know, go on ahead.
We're living in such a selfie world, a me first world. I mean, you can hardly buy pajamas for your children when they're little without some kind of selfish mantra on the front of the pajamas, like I'm number one, or, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So your message, it's the opposite of what the secular culture, you know, is dictating to people, isn't it, Jimmy?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Because it's, you know, when if you think about it, I've never taken a selfie before. I mean, I there's a part of me that's like, who wants to see my mug on Facebook or whatever, you know, but I mean, I think if you look at it, I remember there was one clip on Facebook of during a baseball game, maybe a St. Louis game or something, 4 girls were spending like 10 minutes taking selfies, you know, primping their hair and such like that. And it's kind of, but you know, instead of criticizing them, oh, you're so selfish, blah, blah, blah. What is that action of? They want to know they're beautiful. They want to know they're important. They want to know they're a gift, you know, that they have something to give. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if you're really, I mean, you have to give it to Planned Parenthood as much as it, I mean, because they really knew how to hijack it. They really knew how to take out the dignity of the human person. You know, and like I said, how many people know about the gift of self? I don't think anyone's ever, I think people have a concept of it.
Right.
But once you get in, here's the problem too. Once you get into the hookup culture, you know, I mean, you think to yourself, well, that gift's gone. And so you just it's like snowball effect. You keep spiraling down.
Right.
You know, but I mean, I think that's where John Paul is so revolutionary, is that you bring out the gift of self. How much is going to change in this world? Example, Florida. You know what I mean?
Right.
Now, of course, I don't know all the details. This kid was a nut job and everything, but maybe that's too radical of an example. But even the bullying in schools, if you see a person with dignity, you're not going to you're going to treat them differently. Like, I studied a lot on the Holocaust.
Right.
They had to brainwash the men on the ramp at Auschwitz. They had to brainwash them. They had to be brainwashed. To think that blame the Jews. See them as objects to be used instead of a person worthy of love.
So when you were behind the bar and you're talking to these men, so even the men who don't know Jesus, but did you find they were receptive to this message?
Absolutely.
Really?
Absolutely.
So what would be
Absolutely.
Because you don't clobber anybody over their head, Jimmy. You take someone who's not a believer in Jesus, but they're desperate for answers, and you're not going to be evangelizing necessarily behind the bar, but how would you take that man who has no faith, and I know before we had mentioned like wild at heart, what would you be recommending to him in trying to find some kind of what am I trying to say? I'm trying to find the right word, like a grounding. Mm-hmm. What can he go back to?
Sure. Well, that's a very difficult question to answer, because it in a sense, it's relative. It's relative and it's not relative. It's relative in the sense that it's not a one size fits all kind of thing. It's like a shoe. You have to tailor a shoe to the person. You have to tailor really how you talk to people to that person. Biggest thing I've found, especially people without faith, is biggest thing you want to do is you want to listen. And it's amazing. When I was working behind the bar, it was usually them who opened up to me about their lives. I didn't have to open up to them. They're like, "Oh, what'd you study? Theology." And they would just open right up. I was shocked at how many people opened up to me. I was like, wow, and it shows you that people have a real hunger and a real thirst for truth. Everyone thinks the sky's falling, and yes, there are terrible things happening, but the sun still rose today. I think there's incredible hope for the future of America, the future of the world. It's going to take a lot of work. But back to your question about guys who really have no faith, what I would usually do is I never want to pressure someone or oppress them with doctrine or anything, and I would always ask them, well, would you like, are you fine talking about it? And after they say yes, if they answered in the affirmative, I would start talking to them, and I would share really my faith journey, and I would listen to them, let them open up and talk about, I would let them talk about really their journey. But I think it's a difficult thing to answer, but one thing I think that really binds us, that I think John Paul was so right on, is we all want love. None of us wants to be treated as an object for use. We all want to be a person worthy of love. Right. So that's really where I would learn to hit them. And that's really where hitting them with the concept of the gift of self. And you don't even have to bring God into it. Right. When you mention the gift of self, they think, oh, interesting. Okay. Oh, wow. Like, I do have something to give. I do have, like, life is actually worth living. I don't need to be, dread waking up every day. When you really hit them with the aspect of love, and you really hit them too with the aspect of, that one thing that I would say is, we all want love. This is how we fell from it. Here's how we're meant to get it back. Here's how we're meant to have that life, that love life. Really, that the glory of what it means to be human. That's how we're meant to have it back. That's how I'd explain it to them.
That's so beautiful.
They would. Yeah, and they would latch onto it, because all of us have experienced rejection or disappointment in the sphere of love, right? But, just as when we were kids, my two little nieces dress up like little princesses, Cinderella and Snow White. We all, even though we grow up, we still have that fairy tale aspect to our psyche, to our being. We still want it, and right. It's like, we've all crossed these various lines. We've been wounded, we've been hurt. And I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, we've crossed these lines, because then they back away, because no one wants to admit their faults. But, when you mention it in that way, kind of give them, the kid gloves, here's how you really get it back. It's something that they latch onto, and they begin to, it makes them think, and that's really what the job is to make them think, really to plant those seeds. And then, you do your job and you trust God to do his. He takes it from there.
You have that gift of being able to make a sentence and then a question and then listen for the answers. So I can only imagine what it was like to be in, the jail. In fact, speaking about the jail, do you have any situations where you could share anything about any of the conversations with the men?
Well, I mean, one thing that I found was really interesting when I went into the prison, I'd go in ad lib, and they'd have to call my guy out. But, I'd just be standing there, and they would shuffle convicts by me who were going to go see their lawyer. And what I found was interesting was, I'd see them, they'd see me make eye contact. Nothing wrong with just saying hello, like, waving hello or, hey, how you doing? And they'd respond back. It's not like they have like something on their forehead saying, bleep off kind of thing. Right. So they're, take them out of the jumpsuit. They're the normal guy you could really sit down at a bar with and, have a conversation with. I remember the guy that I was with, when I first went in there, one of the guys was kind of showing me how to evangelize, and God bless him. I know he had good intentions. He had good intentions. The problem was it almost came off like an interrogation session, and I was just kind of like, oh boy, you're gonna lose this guy. It's just, so one thing I did with my convict, I'm not going to say who he is because he has a right to privacy like all of us, but really, I would just, more than anything, I would just shoot the breeze with him. Just talk about, where he's been, where he's going, or what'd you do before you came in here. And I never asked, he was in here he would tell me, well, I can't really pursue anything now. I'm a felon. And I told him, I looked him straight in the eye. I said, look, I know you're a felon. I'm like, you did something. I told him, I said, I don't want to know what you did. I don't care what you did. I said, what I care about is one day you're going to get out of here. What are you going to do to stay out? That's what I care about. What are you going to do? What are you going to do to reform your life?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
The goal is to deliver a message of truth, inspiration, and hope to the world, to unite people from all backgrounds and beliefs in an effort to advance humanity. News blogs, informative podcasts, and entertaining videos. It's AmericaOutloud.com, where the conversation never ends, with 24/7 streaming on our free apps on both Android and Apple. Welcome to the new era in communications, America Out Loud Talk Radio.
All right, welcome back on to What If We've Been Wrong, and I'm talking with Jimmy Berkon about the destruction of masculinity because of radical feminism. And in that last segment, Jimmy, I sort of had to cut you off. We were talking about your experience inside the prison, and you said you were going to dovetail a story about something that happened in the prison.
Sure. No, I was talking about my mentee that I had in there, and really another conversation took place at the bar. When you're in the prison, really all you can really talk about is, the question they get oftentimes is, oh, what are you in for? What'd you do, kind of thing. And there's a great line, and this parallels the problem with masculinity in modern day culture. There's a great line in the movie Shawshank Redemption where one of the prisoners who's been in, great movie, by the way, if people, your listeners haven't seen it, they need to see it. It's an incredible cinematic accomplishment. But a guy that's been in there, his name is Brooks. He's been in there for over 50 years. He's about to be released, and he attacks one of his fellow prisoners, and they're in the courtyard talking about it, and they're like, I don't know what happened in there. And Morgan Freeman, who plays a guy by the name of Red, he says, he's not psych or anything. He's just institutionalized. And he says to his fellow inmates, he says, these walls are funny. First you hate them, then you get used to them. As enough time passes, it gets so you depend on them. That's institutionalized. Wow. And that's a perfect parallel to really what's happened with masculinity. At first, these certain things that kind of take you away from what you really wanted in life, like the fairy tale story kind of thing. Right. At first, with the hookup culture, there used to be a point where even though it's exciting, at first you might get to hate them, but then as time passes, getting used to them, and then as our culture's gone, we become dependent on it. As Terry, you brought up with the sex ed curriculum, right. What's going on, it's like we're refusing to look for a better way of doing things, exactly. And just, And I don't need to tell you, 60 million dead, thousands of, millions of men who've been wounded, women as well, and children too,
Sexually transmitted diseases, millions of sexually transmitted diseases. That's not God's design. Oh, gosh.
Yeah,
Jimmy,
exactly.
we've talked in the past about two roads of masculinity. Can you expound on that?
Well, sure. Well, I mean, the two roads of masculinity I've really thought about, and these are kind of when masculinity gets wounded, and John Eldridge brings this out. You get a silent, passive masculinity where you just try to get by, and I've lived that too, where you just, you basically trash your dreams and hopes for the future, but then too, you have an aggressive masculinity, which is really what we have taking place, which is taking, consuming, using others for your selfish gratification. And the funny thing is, a lot of times when masculinity really is distorted, you get an odd combination of both that take place, and that's really, unfortunately, in the culture. Now the real two roads would be either letting masculinity take its distorted form or let it take its glorious form, what it's really meant for, what men are really meant to do.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is, and I wish, the radical feminists would actually listen to us on this instead of thinking we're trying to control them. When I talk about the original goods of masculinity, I mean, it's cliche, but really being the protector and the provider, and it does not mean that women themselves can protect. It does not mean that women can provide. I mean, that's not the point whatsoever. I was, the reason March for Life, I was at the Dubliner, and some lady there said she knew self-defense, and I was like, oh, could you show me a few moves? And within about 3 seconds, she showed me 3 moves on how she could take me out by hitting my throat.
Oh.
So no. She was kind of faking it a little bit, but I'm a lifetime weightlifter, but self-defense is not something I know. But within 4 seconds, she showed me 4 different moves, and I was like, wow, But what I'm saying is that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean a woman's meant to be the dainty damsel in distress, or have the apron on and be in the kitchen all day. What it means is, we have an innate desire in us to protect those dearest to us. Whether they're our children, our wives, even our brothers, or our sisters. We just have that desire in us. Just look at little boys playing a war, in their yard, or playing with little toy guns or something, and you have it right there. That's our desire to protect, our desire to provide. We're meant, we want to work. A good man wants to work. He wants to provide for people, provide for himself, and be the guy who's able to use his God-given talents to the very, very best of his ability. And such.
Love it. Well, because feminism hijacked so much of that from men, and it makes me think about, we've talked about it before, that in order to get to Eve, Satan had to take out Adam. But you've referenced
absolutely.
You've referenced other good examples. Walk us through some of the examples you have. And first, you got to take out the men before you can get to the women.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Well, I mean, I've been thinking about it, kind of praying about it a lot, and in the Genesis, in the Genesis text, if I could refer to that real quick, Adam and Eve were together. Adam was not in another part of the garden when the serpent came to tempt Eve. He was right there with her. Well, how did Satan take him out? And I really think as men, we deal with a spiritual bondage, and something that's really been coming to my mind is fear. Why are men not outside of abortion clinics protesting? Why are men not, when a woman gets pregnant, why do they suggest abortion? Fear. There's something, Satan, that is one of Satan's greatest weapons, is fear. Real life examples of that. I love researching World War II. And when Hitler decided to launch Operation Barbarossa, which was his attack on the Soviet Union, it failed. It's good it failed. Right. But, when they were going through the towns, he had a group of men called the Einsatz group in. Okay. They were the forerunners of Himmler's SS. Himmler's SS police. They were known as the pacifiers. What they would do is they would go in and they'd look for Jews, right? They'd bring the Jews out, hand the men shovels and say, dig a ditch. Have the men kneel down in the ditch. They'd lock and load their rifles, then they'd fire. Then they'd have another group of men stand or kneel on top of the dead bodies. They lock, load, fire again. And their whole reason for doing that was, first of all, the final solution. But second of all, they take out the men. you're not going to have you're not going to have a lot of resistance from the women and children.
Right.
Again, that's not to say women can't defend themselves, but it's just you take out the men, it's easier to get to the women and children. In the concentration camp of Auschwitz, what was it? Or in the movie Schindler's List, women to the left, men to the right. Women to the left, men to the right. They were separating them. Because then, you separate them, take out the guys, and how many movies have we seen? Braveheart, one of the best movies ever made. How did the English get to William Wallace's bride, Marion? They chased him away. They chased him off, right?
Yep.
In Gladiator, what did they do? They captured Maximus, and they had his wife and his son. I mean,
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I know we're talking movies, but the scenario, they're real scenarios. Going back in history. Wow.
Absolutely.
Well,
absolutely.
Moving forward, let me see. So we've talked about the two different roads: masculinity. Let's see, the silent, passive masculinity, the aggressive masculinity. Is there anything else you want to add to any of that before we move on?
Well, I mean, I just think, just a couple things. I think with both of those types of masculinity, I think what men need to realize, and this is going to help with the resolution, realize that both of them, while they're appealing, while they offer comfort, both of them are wrong too. The aggressive masculinity you find with men who are just, straight up angry with others, with themselves, with the world in general. Yeah, the silent, passive masculinity where men are afraid to engage. They're not willing to get out there and cause a stir, or really, for example, be men, stand up and be men. And I think one thing I want to touch on real quick before we move on is one issue we need to really address is just what the sexual revolution has done, especially with pornography. And this is something that's very, very important. Because you have such an epidemic of that with men, you have women now who are not getting married.
Right.
Because the men, the men are not stepping up to the plate. It's actually scientifically proven that when a man watches a pornographic video, the intensity of the feelings is on par with when a man makes love to his wife on their wedding night.
Wow.
You have a culture that's really just replacing, like you said, the sexual act inside marriage. So,
well, Jimmy, they've come out with robots now, for goodness sakes.
Oh, I saw that. I saw that, yeah.
Robots. Oh, it's so bizarre. It's like, I feel like I'm in a different world.
Oh, I know. And I actually, when I was down in Texas, we actually watched a video of one of the robots, and she was talking. You could tell it was a robot, but she was talking like a human person.
Wow.
And it's like we in trying to find the real thing, we've settled for the synthetic. We settled for the fake.
Exactly. Yep.
So
okay, but not that we're going to get into it, but so much. But for men who are struggling with pornography addictions, and they keep going back for as much as they want to try to stop or whatever, and they keep having that feeling of I'm losing, and I'm not worthy of anything, because what advice would you give them?
Sure.
It's almost like not a pep talk, but it's like what can you tell the men? Because I can only imagine there'd be people listening to this, and it may not even be just men. I understand now some women are addicted to it as well. But I know for you it started, whatever, at an earlier age, and it was more accidental or whatever. But just what advice would you give?
Well, sure. If I could make a note with the women real quick, a good friend of mine who's engaged to be married, his fiancee's had to struggle with it. And when he told me that, it wasn't a feeling of, oh, that's pathetic, that's lousy. It's more like it's a feeling of pity, because I know my struggles and such. And it's just, I think really, what I want to tell that person, what I really want to tell myself too is, we're so much better than just the image, just the pixels, just what's on your computer screen. We're so much better than that. We're worth more than that, and I think too, it's something I see a counselor, but also too, I'm probably gonna get involved in a group. And one thing I'd say too is, ever since I was a little kid, people suggested I see a counselor, and I would think for the longest time something was wrong with me.
Oh.
But I found a good counselor, and I would say to the guys out there, there's nothing wrong, or in the women too, there's nothing wrong with seeking help. There's nothing wrong with there's nothing wrong with having a counselor. I mean, I would say, think of it this way. Every guy who's a successful business owner, like our president, Donald Trump, even if you don't like him, he had mentors in business. I mean, his father was a business tycoon, right? My dad, who's a real estate developer in D.C., he had mentors in it. He didn't pop out of the womb and boom, he had everything was ready made. Right. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. There's nothing wrong with asking for an accountability partner, and there's nothing wrong too with. Here's the biggest thing. The biggest danger with pornography is, if you let it fester, it gets worse and worse and worse. And we're having an epidemic right now of where normal heterosexual men are crossing the line into the illegal stuff. Like, I was playing pool with my brother one time, and the news was on, and it said that in the D.C. area, this was about a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago, in the D.C. area, cops can no longer look at financial crime because now they have to look at instances of child pornography. I mean, that's how bad it is. And let me make the statement clear. It is normal heterosexual men. And what it does is, if you look at something, it wears off the receptors in your brain. So you need to look for the deeper and darker stuff. But
to get that high, to get the high,
to get that high, exactly.
Are we talking like a dopamine hit? Is that the equivalent?
Yep.
The dopamine hit. Okay.
Exactly. Yep. I didn't escape my mind what it was. That's exactly it. But when you go to counseling, the good thing about that is you're able to you're in a place where you won't be judged, right. And you're able to flesh out what's really going on. Why do I look at this stuff, or why am I believing these lies of the culture? Why am I hooking up? And you're able to see the why behind the action for doing it. And what it really does is it really brings you back to what it was you're really looking for in the first place, which really is love.
That's right.
It's a distorted pursuit of love.
Mm-hmm. And it's not even the sex; it's love, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this: if you could talk to a room full of whatever you want to call them, I call them radical feminists, the angry mm-hmm. women, and if they weren't going to shout you out and all that, if they're actually going to listen to what you have to say, what would you like to tell a room full of feminists, who are adamant feminists? What would you say?
Sure. I mean, if I'm ever given that opportunity, I mean, first of all, what I would do is, I'd probably apologize, and I would tell them, I mean, you're here because for some reason you've been hurt, and on behalf of those guys, whoever's hurt you, whether you were abused as a little girl or some guy hooked up with you and then ditched you for a pretty old girl, or you were manipulated into an abortion, I would say on behalf of that, I want to humbly ask for your forgiveness, and not be fake about it, but be really sincere, be like, look, you've been hurt, I've been hurt, I know what it's like to be hurt, and from the bottom of my heart, I'm sorry for what's been done to you. I am. But I would also want to invite them, look inside. We have enough people out there preaching and saying, oh, this is what masculinity looks like, this is what femininity looks like. I would want to say to them, look inside your own heart. Look at the good desires of what you have, the desire for love, the desire for work, the desire for a family, the desire to make a difference. Look inside that, and find the strength to make it a reality. You have that goodness in you, and I would also say too, maybe when you're ready, think about that time where you didn't hate men, where you didn't hate us, you weren't filled with spite, right. And bring yourself back to that, right. and just go on ahead.
Oh, when right then I was just thinking about beauty, goodness, and truth, and how those are written on our heart. To talk to us about how being able to triangulate with beauty, goodness, and truth to the world's problems. It's not the world's problems, but the issues that we're dealing with today.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, if you take it, there are two sides of the coin. We're all looking for beauty, truth, and goodness, and the lies of the culture always have an element of each of them. The truth, you're looking for love. Well, here's a way you can find love. That they do it under the guise of truth, that you'll find love or you'll find happiness. Beauty, there's nothing more beautiful than a woman in a man's eyes. John Eldridge writes in Wild at Heart that there was a poet who wrote, the naked female form is a glimpse of eternity too great for the eye of man. And that's not a perversion. That's a beautiful thing. I mean, it reveals, the divinity to us, But then you have the goodness, the goodness of pleasure. And what culture has done is they've given us the promise of the goodness of pleasure, the beauty of the woman, and the truth that, well, you will find a sense of happiness, and they've distorted it. Well, what's the flip side of that? We all want truth. None of us wants to be lied to. Beauty. We all want the fullness of beauty, not just a part of it. We don't want just as a culture and as men, I really believe as men, we just don't want what is physical. We want what is eternal. We want what is personal. No guy in his heart of hearts dreams of just having, a physical concordance with a woman. No, we want to have something deep and beautiful, like we see in a fairy tale. Like my nieces watched the 2015 Cinderella, and it's so beautiful because it shows not just the beauty of the woman physically, but also interiorly, her heart. We talked about truth, beauty, goodness. We always look for what is good. We always want something where we don't look for goodness merely means the absence of evil, something that's pure, that's whole, that's innocent, and that's something that we really long for, and I believe really long for as men. And if we untwist these lies, we really bring ourselves back to what it means to be men, but also to especially with God, when we allow Him to untwist these lies for us and to bring us back to our true self, to thwart the false self, to bring us back to our true self and to that gift we are. That's when we really find out who we are meant to be, who we're meant to be for the world, we're meant to be for others, we're meant to be for women, our families, and that's how we help transform the culture and how we help heal the wounds that women, children, and men have suffered.
And Jimmy, that's exactly why I had you on this show. What if we've been wrong? I love you, and I've said this from the time I met you. God has great plans for you, because what you just shared today, every American man, and I think every American woman needs to hear.